folks, welcome back to Game Geeks. I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Welcome back to Amnesia Boulevard. For those of you who are new to the show or who just chose not to remember that particular little random piece of trivia, that's where I get to sit here in a chair and talk about the good old days, like I don't have any teeth, and the kind of gaming that you little whippersnappers don't remember, and get off my lawn with your dice bags because you just don't know. Well, that's not quite true. I really do embrace most new gaming, and I love the fact that new gamers are coming into the fold all the time, because if not, this hobby is going to die, and nobody wants that. So in today's Amnesia Boulevard, we're kind of going back to a couple of older Dungeons & Dragons settings that are near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk about two of them, Greyhawk and Birthright. I'm going to do Birthright second because, quite frankly, I have more to say about that one. Greyhawk goes back a long way. Gary Gygax's original campaign. There's a lot of debate of which came first, Blackmoor or Greyhawk. Well, I can tell you which one survived the longest and has had the most versions of it. This is not a debate for grognards. If this is something you want to talk about, feel free to go to our Facebook page and kick the ideas around, because I think that'd be wonderful. Just keep it clean and keep it friendly, or we will drop the hand grenade of Damocles onto you if you get too nasty. So, Greyhawk had several iterations. Now, if you're looking for a good description of the history of the Greyhawk setting, go take a look at Designers and Dragons. We reviewed it last year. It's a really interesting history of the RPG hobby. It's in the TSR section, and there's a lot of rise and fall with that setting. It's never had the perpetual success of the Forgotten Realms, but I really like Greyhawk, initially because it's so frickin' random. Now, they've tried to rationalize pieces of it, fix pieces of it as the line has gone on, try to bring it together to a cohesive whole. But honestly, one of the things I like is there's a lot of you sit there, stare at it, scratch your head and wonder what in the hell's going on, because you have these random civilizations that are similar to others in our world that are crammed next to each other that make absolutely no sense whatsoever. But on some level, I find that level of what the hell delightful, because it's sort of like romping through someone's imagination, and yeah, they decided to mash these things up, and oh look, the USS Enterprise has crashed into a series of mountains. Why? Because it's cool. So Greyhawk has one of the most memorable maps that if you've been playing for a while, you'll recognize it. If you've been playing a while, things like Perrinland, Furundi, Nyrond, the Empire of Uz, it sounds weirder than it actually is, Keelland, all of the Grand Duchy of Jeff, Crystal Mist Mountains, the Dry Steppes, all of these things will trigger memories for you, almost Pavlovian if you've been around for a long time. I like to go back to Greyhawk every once in a while and reread it, see what they're doing. Had a great second coming of age in 3.0 and 3.5 D&D, where Greyhawk was the canonical setting, and everything they did was a play off of that, which I just thought was awesome. And then the less I say about 4th edition, the less hate mail I get, but I was a little depressed that they got away from that a little bit. But I understand it for development reasons. So I think my favorite era of Greyhawk is from the 90s. It was the From the Ashes. It was after the Greyhawk Wars, which was their big, let's shake everything up and relaunch it. It was much darker. It was almost post-apocalyptic, and it had a lot more of just fun weirdness going on. And it was really a dark setting to play in. And that's really my favorite era. When they got out of it in later editions, later eras, it changed a lot of it up, which depressed me a little. But every once in a while, I like to go back and look at Greyhawk and just, yeah, I remember this. And it's sort of like when you're remembering an awesome dream you had when you were a kid, and you're remembering pieces of it, and it's that moment of happiness when things were a lot simpler and you didn't have to worry about braces for your kids, or you didn't have to worry about anything else except for how are you going to defeat the Arch-Lich that had taken over the Grand Duchy of Jeff this week. All right, that's Greyhawk. We're moving out of that now. Birthright launched in the mid-90s as another setting for Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. Birthright did something I haven't seen before or since, which was, instead of starting out as the heroic blacksmith's son who takes up his father's blade because he was killed by orc raiders, and then carving your own empire out of the monster-filled wastelands, you start out as a king. or a lord, or the head of a series of mercantile guilds, or a great wizard who controls power from the land, or the head of a church, and develop power, develop authority thusly. It was a very ambitious thing for them to take on. The idea behind the setting is there was a great battle amongst the different races of men and the gods, where they all were aligning to fight the Dark Lord Azrai and all of his minions and all of the people that were following him. And the gods realized that this wasn't going to win unless they sacrificed themselves at a mount called Diasmar. And at Mount Diasmar, they all essentially blew themselves up at once to destroy Azrai, which, as you can imagine, set off a chain reaction that wasn't particularly pleasant to the environment. Well, once they blew up Mount Diasmar, all of that deific energy had to go someplace. And so it poured out into the followers that were around them at the time. The people that were the closest and the most powerful, the most loyal followers of those gods at the time became new gods themselves. Azrai was destroyed. Wait for it. Azrai was destroyed, but his bloodline got spread out as well. And those bloodlines, for the most powerful people, they became the new gods. For the ones that were sort of second rank or second tier out there, they absorbed a lot of it, and there's sort of like a map for how far out it goes. And then that level of deific energy gives you certain gifts, abilities, extra widgets of power. Honestly, it's not that balanced, which is kind of fun, but extra levels of abilities that your characters that have those bloodlines have. Those bloodlines can be passed on to your descendants, so it can be carried out. The more powerful the bloodline is, the more abilities you have of it. If you have Azrai's bloodline, chances are you're going to turn into some sort of evil squicky monster. You can steal other people's bloodlines by stabbing them in the heart as a kill shot, not unlike beheading an immortal in Highlander, except there's none of that holy ground weirdness. What do the bloodlines let you do besides have extra cool powers? Well, they allow you to tap into abilities from the land, such as magic, such as the people's faith that allows you to cast bigger spells. If you're a churchman, or the powers of the land that allow you to supercharge some of your arcane spells if you're a wizard. Following along those lines, there were specific races of people. Now, that's really not that new. That goes back to Greyhawk, as far as I know, maybe even before that a little bit, where you could say that you're a human of these derivations, but it really didn't buy you anything until Birthright, where there were slight mechanical bonuses that came with every one. Then there were the domains. Now, the map of the Birthright world itself it's interesting, but honestly, I can't look at a map of the entire world without thinking that it's a giant modification of the Wu-Tang Clan symbol. That's the only mention of Wu-Tang Clan we're ever going to have in the history of Game Geeks. It's a big W, and the different races of people are all kind of coordinated into 5 different pieces of the world. Azrai's people really didn't land anywhere because, let's face it, they're bad and no one wants them as neighbors. Then there are different domains, different rulers. Every racial type has its own leadership style, and it really just expands out there with a level of detail and fun that I hadn't seen before. Is the line perfect? Not really, because it attempted to do domain maintenance, resource maintenance, mass combat, and role-playing all at the same time, and it doesn't do any one of them particularly well, sorry to say. Even the inclusion of a shadow world, which is the dark, evil land where everything is rotten and nasty, sort of changes up the game quite a bit. I still love it for a level of interest that I never had in another game. This might be the fact that this is when I first had some financial and mobile freedom, and I was able to go to the comic book store every month and buy whatever the new Birthright thing that came out was. I can proudly tell you that I own every piece of Birthright that they published, except for most of the books, because I didn't care for those that much. Birthright really was a victim of the collapse of TSR in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it did not survive into the 3.0, 3.5 launch. Depressed me a little bit. I was kind of excited about it when TSR during the 3.5 and 4.0 era started re-releasing some of their older settings with updated rules. We saw Dark Sun come back in 4.0. Forgotten Realms never really died. It just sort of shifted along the lines for everyone. I was hoping Birthright would see the light of day again, but alas. Before I sign off talking about this, there's one thing I really have to plug for Birthright that I think made it very successful from my mind, and that is, and forgive me, I'm going to mispronounce the guy's name, because it's kind of hard to say, and Tony, if you're watching this, feel free to mispronounce mine. Tony Scuduzzo did the art for most of the covers of the Birthright stuff. And I feel like his art defined the setting as much as any of the writing, any of the mechanics, or any of the other things that tied in to the game. It has a gritty, earthy feel to it, but still, most of the rest of this is really impressive. If you ignore the Havens of the Great Bay, which looks like it's a cover of a Fabio romance novel, the rest of it really holds up nicely. Like, take a look at this. This is the most high fantasy art you're going to see in any of these. You've got an elf and a dwarf and a human, and they're opening up a crypt, and then there is something coming out of it, and just hilarities ensuing. But for most of the rest of it, for example, take a look at covers of Tribes of the Heartless Waste. Damn. Additionally, the maps are good. There was a level of quality with Birthright that I absolutely loved. I'm going to keep waxing poetical about covers here for just a second, because the Book of Priestcraft has an image of a transfer of bloodline power and regency that really helps drive home the seriousness of the entire situation. And while I love the Book of Magecraft, I think it's one of the more interesting books on magic I've ever read. Tell me that doesn't look like a heavy metal cover. I mean, seriously, that looks like Eddie needs to be crawling out of one of these caves, and congratulations, Quiet Riot has a new album. Again, like Wu-Tang, this is the one time you'll see Quiet Riot mentioned on Game Geeks. You saw it here first. I'm old. I make no apologies for it. I make depression for it, but I don't make apologies for it. And sometimes revisiting these older settings is fun. For those of you who remember these, I hope you enjoyed it. For those of you who don't, go back and look at some of this older stuff. It can be a lot of fun to take a look at. For Game Geeks, I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Good day and good gaming.